Domestic violence tends to get introduced in these types of situations to explain the perception of the threat by the person, the defendant, the accused in this situation. This particular case, I didn't really consider this a classic battered women syndrome kind of case.
Mm,
So in those cases, what I am used to seeing is I'm used to seeing a situation where it's really not disputed that there is no imminent threat of violence at all. You're talking about a situation where, like, say a man is abusing his wife, has been doing it for years. It's escalated. He's asleep in bed, and she sneaks up and whacks him with a with a frying pan or something, kills him, and is then prosecuted for it. And so those are situations where that's what I would consider kind of the classic battered wife defense,
mm,
because there's no clear imminent threat. And so the need is to educate the jury on how domestic violence works and why a person who is trapped in this situation and has been uh, sort of trained, to expect, to respond in certain ways, and so forth, why that person can have a heightened sense of threat from an abuser, because of the dynamics of that relationship, the instability, the unpredictability, the eggshells, just all of the things that kind of go along with that process, as well as there's often a cycle of escalation. It's depicted in a sort of circular fashion where you have the honeymoon stage, everything is fine. You're being love bombed. They're
mm.
doing things like marrying you in 13 days and investing millions of dollars in a ballet company for you. And everything seems to be fantastic, but then things get bad, and you get into an uglier stage that can culminate in violence, and then there's a period of rebuilding after that takes you right back into that honeymoon phase. And so somebody who has been through this cycle many times with somebody in this relationship, they're going to be able to recognize the signs of when are we in a shift from things being good to things being dangerous. And that's often what juries need to be educated about in these situations. Why would somebody think that their sleeping husband in the bed is dangerous at that point in time? Well, because
Mm.
they have been through this enough to recognize, oh, he went to sleep drunk, and when he wakes up, he's going to be like this, or he said something like this before he fell asleep that let me know, he was angry and that there was high risk, when he was going to wake up. It's about just establishing familiarity with that pattern and what it's like to live under a dynamic like that. So that's sort of the typical relationship between, like, why domestic violence gets brought up in these types of situations, with relationships like this.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that thorough explanation. So, in regards to stand your ground, then,
Mhm.
ha- what was the applicability of that? Actually, before I even go into that, you did just
Mhm.
make a point that just came back into my mind now. What do you do you think that the defense, Neil Taylor, do you think that he done a good job presenting and educating the jury about
Mhm.
why Ashley had to take the measures that she did on that day?
Um, well, I have sort of mixed feelings about this as well. One of the other challenges I had with being able to watch this case, besides just how it was, pitched as a character
Mm,
battle between people, I hated all the lawyers. I really did. I didn't like any of them, and I I think
yeah.
my main praise for Mr. Taylor was, I thought he did a very good job of putting together the case. Getting the right people to come in and testify, the right kinds of expertise to come in and explain how this could have
Mm,
happened, how this is consistent with her theory, and stuff like that. I don't want to fault him for not convincing the jury, 100% of just his perspective on how the case should have gone.
Mm.
It's too high a bar, and like I said, these are just such complicated cases that you don't really know what factor is going to be dispositive for one juror versus another juror. So it's not a situation where you can just strategize like what's going to convince everybody. You got to do the best you can and just hope that you can get enough of them. But I did think it was very important. For example, he brought on the expert to talk about the dynamics, of domestic violence, how that fit into this situation. Without that information, I think it's very realistic to expect that jurors who aren't familiar with it, who haven't gone through it, haven't seen somebody that they know go through it, haven't learned about it through their own, work or education or something like that, they're going to see a situation where an unarmed man is shot and killed by a woman. So it's very, very important to put that in context.
Especially with cases like this, because that is especially with DV, it's not as straightforward as rape. Grape for YouTube purposes. But even with grape, it's still not straightforward because sometimes the evidence could be lacking. But again, when it comes to like self-defense, and it seems like the system, or at least to me, like the legal system does not. Would you agree with me if I say that the legal system maybe has not caught up yet with how to prosecute cases like this? If it was to be, actually, let me ask it like this: are you familiar with reactive abuse?
Yes.
So, how do you think that would work in this particular case with Ashley Benefield? Do you think that she has more of a case for reactive abuse than self-defense, for example? And can the legal system even accommodate such a defense?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so reactive abuse is this idea that the person who is not the primary abuser in the relationship will nevertheless either adopt abusive tactics of the primary abuser, or just reach a point, kind of a breaking point where there's a lashing out, a kind of reassertion of the self and boundaries and things along those lines. We saw a lot about reactive abuse in the Depp versus Heard case because that was part of the question. When you can see behaviors that appear to be abusive on both sides, which we did, quite frankly, we did see, ugly text messages from Johnny and some stonewalling and stuff like that. But again, it's because these situations are complex and they have to be placed in context. And so if you didn't understand that Amber Heard was consistently trying to beat him up, that's why he would leave the conversation, it makes you understand why he would react in that situation. So from the legal standpoint, the reactive abuse, it's not going to be a defense because what is really criminalized is just the conduct, not the motivation for it. So it's got to be fit within a framework of some type of legal excuse or legal justification for the act. Some kind of, duress is not usually a defense to a homicide crime, but self-defense, for example, insanity, just things that would be classic legal defenses to a criminal charge. And that's where reactive abuse then typically gets shoehorned into a self-defense type of dynamic through this battered spouse type of defense.
Yeah, I had to ask that question because that popped up in my head numerous times when I was watching through this her testimony and through this whole trial, because I was because from what she was describing, and I can imagine it being terrifying from the onset, because she described that dog was beating on the dog and was shooting up the ceiling and doing all of those behaviors. I can see how that would terrify someone that